Dun, 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 dun. Hello, YouTube. I'm going to talk about real quickly what it costs and how much maintenance and all that kind of stuff it takes to maintain a car like this and what is broken over the last, say, 45 days of drifting. So this is a S14 Zinky, probably with a kooky swap front end with a truck motor, LQ9 V8 with a T56 transmission, an R200 that's welded, rear mount radiator, suspension, and other things. It's a pretty simple drift car from the perspective of what we do nowadays, like a V8 swap and a 240SX and a cage and stuff like that. It's not turbo. It's not like some crazy race fuel engine. It runs on 93 octane and stuff. And what has it broken so far in the last, say, 40 days of drifting? I'm totally off on all my math. It has to be at least 60 to 80 days of drifting. Don't trust anything I say in this video. Keep going. Which is a lot of drifting, by the way. That's literally hundreds of tires and tons of tandem time. At least one pretty heavy wreck that we had to have a frame pull and cut the front of the car off. But anyways, the consumables from the drivetrain perspective have been no axles, believe it or not. They're 350Z axles, I think with villain stubs into an R200. We have broken 2 R200s that were welded. We found those locally at the events that we were at on Drift Week and swapped them in. So I would say those last about 20 events or so, and then they break. I would like to swap over to a 350Z diff, even though those are R200s, they're newer. And I think the teeth are probably bigger because they're different ring gears and stuff. And that's what we're doing, is every once in a while we'll shatter teeth. The diffs themselves, like the carriers and the welded parts, don't break. Moving forward, the drive shaft has had no attention. The transmission's been really good. It's a rebuilt T56. However, the bell housing corkscrewed and broke around and the transmission was falling out. So we did have to replace the bell housing. That did also take out a clutch and flywheel and pressure plate combo, just because I don't remember exactly how it failed, but it probably pulled the pressure plate apart, or on the teeth, it did something to them as the transmission came down. And then we also had one clutch and flywheel pressure plate failure where we had a pressure plate where it bolts onto the flywheel, the little mounting tabs. Those wore and broke through from vibration, I think. So we did replace that. It's currently running a stock LS something clutch, flywheel, and pressure plate, and it feels amazing compared to aftermarket stuff, but it probably isn't gonna last super long. But it already does have at least 8 days of drifting on it, I think. So it's lasting a lot longer than we thought it would, but it feels amazing because it's just so buttery, easy to engage and everything else. It's not, a heavy clutch and everything. Moving up to the shifter plate itself underneath all that stuff did also wear out. So it was allowing me to not hit third when I wanted to, and it would hit fifth really easily, and it just became kind of like a mushy mess inside the shifter. We did replace that as a maintenance item. I ran it longer than I should have because we didn't know it was broken at first. And we did get a whole new shifter for that. The diffs were $200 each. I think that was maybe like 300. I don't think anything else major broke in here. Maybe a relay has been replaced a couple times or something. Going up to the engine bay, we did have some stuff go wrong in there, but this is a built engine, and the transmission I think is rebuilt or built. I don't know how you would consider that, but this is an iron block, does have aftermarket rods, pistons, heads, cam. I don't remember if the crank is actually aftermarket or not. Oh, it is scat? Yeah, so the motor's been great, has a Canton pan, no dry sump or AccuSump. It has seen hell and back and has been super reliable and good. We really don't worry about the engine at all. The only problems we did have were cooling related, and we added a rear mount radiator setup to compensate for the cooling. Originally, when we got the car, it was cooling great, but we did all that to just fix all the cooling issues, and we had some teething problems with that, but it's fantastic now. When we first got the car, it had some oil problems where it was just leaking out the back of valve covers and out the back of the intake manifold area somewhere, I forget, and down the transmission and stuff, and it was making smoke everywhere. That got fixed, and we realigned it, raised the car, changed over to BC coilovers and some other things, and the car's gotten a lot better from that perspective. But the engine is exactly how we got it for the most part, other than some seals. No problems with the engine, no problem with the transmission other than the bell housing. We did replace a power steering pump, 2 alternators, cooling stuff. We replaced the head gaskets just for the heck of it, but they were not bad. just didn't know what the cooling problem was originally, and we replaced the water pump, the thermostat, and everything on the cooling side, chasing some cooling problems. And then, yeah, I think that's it. So that is probably $1,000 in little things in the engine bay, and then probably at least $1,000 with no labor for the cooling system, for the rear mount setup. We did, because I wrecked the car, replace the front with a tube frame. That was probably, I don't know, $1,000 or something. I don't remember. And we also, when I wrecked it, had to replace the Techno Toy arm, and that was a couple $100 probably. We also had a knuckle failure. We had the Driftworks, I think, Geomaster knuckles in the rear, and the welds broke, probably because we had some contact or something, but we had to replace the rear knuckles. So that was some money. I forget how much. How much are our knuckles? Probably $400. Yeah, it was like $400 to swap to those other knuckles. This is the same body kit we had it with. We did paint it and did some body work and cleaned it up. What else? I think that's the majority of parts that have broken. So we haven't done any real engine work. Even though I say head gaskets, it was just changed them, but they weren't a problem. But you could count that money, I guess. But it was just wasted money that we didn't actually have to do. Transmission's been good. Diff's broken. Coilovers we changed just because we're sponsored by BC, so it's easy. But we didn't have to change coilovers. It was just the car came on some other brand, and I prefer these. We added bash bar up front. Added extra cooling. Oh, this is, probably need to check that. Added some extra coolers up front, and I think that's everything on there. So let's talk about overall cost on this stuff. Realistically, that's only a few $1,000s in replacement parts over the course of multiple years of drifting. And this car, I should have said this at the beginning, I got this car in trade for the 370Z Nismo project that I bought for like $4 or $5 grand after it had been crashed a little bit, and I put a couple grand into that, plus like fixing it, plus a Wise Fab kit and coilovers and a hydraulic handbrake and like a seat, and I traded that for this car, which was a pretty good deal for both of us, I think, at the time, because that Nismo has gone on to, I think, be sold for like $20-something thousand, even though I got it super cheap. And this car, I've been offered pretty good money for it, but I can't sell it because it costs so much to build. But getting back to the point is, the car only took a few $1,000s in maintenance, but that is kind of a trick, because taking this thing to events, putting hundreds of tires on it, putting fuel in the truck, hotels, entry fees, all that stuff has cost more than the maintenance on the car. And we've also done, I think, 2 oil changes a year on this specific car. So maybe under 10 oil changes, so that's not a big deal. 1 transmission fluid change, and then the diff just gets changed fluid as we break them. Maybe we should change it before we break them. So maintenance has been cheap. Actually running the car has been very expensive from event cost and stuff. So the maintenance basically isn't even a thing to worry about. And then cost to build the car. We didn't build this car, but I still have some money in it. But for example, when we got this car, it had receipts for I think $9,500 or something for the engine going through a machine shop and getting sorted out, and all those parts, the aftermarket heads, and I think it has PRC heads and the scat rotating assembly. And then obviously all the machine work and all that labor. The transmission probably was $2,500 to have rebuilt. I think that got done before I got it, but I have so many cars I can't remember all that stuff. And then having like a caged car and all that stuff, and seats and all the race car stuff, that gets expensive. So I would think this car originally was probably 30 grand to build or something like that. It's kind of hard to guess. And then nowadays, this car would probably cost 45 to build. Probably could only sell the car for 25. I did have some offers at 25, but I can't sell it, and it wasn't for sale anyways. And then to take this car to the next level would be super expensive with a quick change, a dog box, like a high comp, 427 motor. You start getting really expensive really fast. Just the drivetrain would cost double what this entire car probably cost to originally put together. One of the reasons that these cars, kind of skipping around because I'm ADD, one of the things that keeps a car like this kind of cheap, this V8 platform, is because you can't up the boost and you can't change out turbos easily in fuel systems because it doesn't really matter. It don't end up modifying these cars much power-wise. You put this engine in and you leave it exactly the way it is forever. You're not changing intake manifolds, you're not changing injectors because it doesn't matter. You're not changing hardly anything when the car functions. So that saves you a lot of money over time and a lot of like thought and everything else. When I have turbo cars, like I have this E36 turbo car right now, I've only driven it in an event really once, and I've already swapped out a turbo, already swapped out the whole fuel system, already tuned it multiple times, already had it on the dyno 3 times. Like the amount of time and effort you spend modifying the car and changing things is pretty high compared to actually driving the car. And this thing just sits in the trailer all the time. So this thing is actually ridiculously cheap and easy to run, as well as the fact that BMW that's turbo on mine is a high comp turbo motor, and then that circle track car as well, both require race fuels. So even if it's E85, you end up spending a lot of effort or money on race fuels. And this car just takes 93 and it's just so easy. We have the same fuel for the generators. I take 30 gallons of fuel to the events. We always have enough. And on the E85 and the race car, like the carbed car, like those cars will go through 40 gallons of fuel at the event, and you have to have it all on hand because you can't go get it. So you have to travel everywhere you go with it. Normally I travel to the events and then right outside the gate of like whatever track, I just fill up with 93. So I don't have to haul fuel around all the time, which makes it really nice. And then also just being able to use the same fuel in the generators is super nice because we actually use a lot of fuel in the generators because of tire machines and air compressors and everything when we're running. Cool. So yeah, I do think the V8 cars are incredibly cheap. They're not as cheap as a 350Z or something like that to run, but for the amount of power you get and the amount of like ease, you really can't go wrong with like an LS based car. And this is an LQ car. It's not even an aluminum block. This thing's fantastic. Okay, I think that's it. I don't know what the ending of this video is other than this is a cheap car to maintain, a little bit expensive to build. It's way cheaper to buy these cars already done, but you could very easily buy a garbage car that takes a lot to get together. And the cost to go to events is far more expensive than maintaining this car. So the maintenance isn't really even an issue or a thought. If I'm only doing say $4,000 or $5,000 of maintenance over the cost of 40 days of drifting or however many, that is cheap. And this car went on drift week 1, drift week 2, it sat out drift week 3, and now drift week 4, drift week 5, plus entire seasons of Lone Star Drift, plus going to like the Adam LZ Invitational, plus going to extra fun days at like Hallett and other places. Each drift week is 8 days of drifting. And maybe it's actually seen like 60 or 70 days of drifting or more. I don't know, it must have seen a lot of drifting. So it's a good car. You should get one. And like always, let's thank those sponsors: BC Racing Coilovers, ECU Master, NK Wheels, Vapetasia, Heatwave, and What Monsters Do. Thank you so much for supporting Drift Week content. This is, I think, the very first video. We got a lot coming. See you guys soon.